إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. Verily all praise are due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we praise Him alone, and we seek His help and His forgiveness alone. We seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the evil within our own selves and from the evil of our own actions. Whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guides, there is no one that can misguide. And whomsoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves to be misguided, there is no one that can guide back to the straight path. I testify that none has the right to be worshipped, to be followed and to be obeyed except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I testify that the Messenger Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the servant of Allah and his last and final prophet and messenger who was sent for the whole of mankind. And I testify that the only way of life that is acceptable to God Almighty, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is Islam. Is total submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And by following the Messenger Muhammad, peace be upon him. Amma ba'd. Today's topic, my dear Muslims, is the topic of prevailing your Deen amongst the Mushrikeen. And making izharud Deen amongst the Mushrikeen. Now, Islam, it was sent, my dear Muslims, it was sent to be a beacon of light where there is darkness, whether it be the darkness within man, within the person himself, or whether it be the society that he lives in. Islam came to be this light in this darkness in mankind, and from where there be the darkness from all kinds of oppression. And indeed, my dear Muslims, the greatest oppression, it is the shirk. And Islam, it was sent to free people from the servitude to the creation, and instead to the servitude and subservience to the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And just to briefly talk, subhanallah, also obviously mentioned that the shirk is the greatest oppression in Surah Luqman, Surah 31 verse 13. And look at this advice that subhanallah Luqman, he gives to his own son. He says, the verse it says, and remember when Luqman said to his son, when he was advising him, O my son, join not in worship others with Allah. Verily, joining others in worship with Allah is the greatest zulm, is the greatest wrongdoing. Subhanallah. He didn't advise his son, oh my son, get a good degree, get a good job, get yourself a good education, oh my son, get married early, this and that, oh my son, get a high paid job, and that you'll be okay for the rest of your life. So the first thing he advised, subhanallah, his son, oh my son, do not commit shirk. Look at that. Because indeed, my friend, that is the greatest of crimes. That is the greatest thing that we need to avoid, the shirk. And in this verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that inna shirka la zulmun azim. And the shirk is the greatest oppression. And subhanallah, it's very ajib the times we live in today, where people, they don't fully comprehend how filthy and how evil this issue of shirk is. People, they just belittle it. They don't give it its right, reverence, i.e. the Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, his right to be worshipped alone. And that the shirk, that to associate partners with Allah, is such a major crime, but people don't really recognize it. that, sometimes if you were to tell someone today, like someone maybe committed homosexuality, he'll get shocked and disgusted. But if you say that someone committed shirk with Allah, subhanallah, it's like the shock isn't there, as much as someone, he committed this major sin, obviously, of this type of zina, subhanallah. And there was a quote once I saw on Twitter from Sheikh Ahmed Musa Jibril. He said that Islam, it was not sent to be lower or to be equal. Subhanallah. Islam was not sent, my dear Muslims, to be lower or to be equal with any other way of life. So what does that leave? It means it has to be superior. It can only be above all other ways of life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send Islam to be under the thumb of the kuffar. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send Islam to be hidden or to be undermined or to be belittled. Islam was not sent just to Islam was sent to change people, not only on a personal level, but to change society via its sharia, via its law and order. Islam was sent for izhar, my dear Muslim, to make it, for it to be apparent, for it to be dominate, for it to supersede, either by people leaving the kufr and embracing Islam, or by living under the rule of the Sharia and paying the jizya. And many people, subhanallah, they quote, this verse. There's a verse in Surah Anbiya, verse 21. Surah 21, verse 107. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. وما أرسلناك إلا رحمة للعالمين. Also, I mentioned this verse, and we have not sent you but as a mercy to all of the alameen, to all of the mankind, to all of the creation. And subhanallah, when we implement the Sharia of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam over the alameen, indeed, my dear Muslim, that is a mercy for them. And this is what the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he came with, and this is what the Sahaba, they understood from him. And that's why the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he conquered the whole of the Arabian Peninsula in his lifetime. And after him, the Sahaba, they continued to expand the rule of Islam by conquering, places like Sham and Faris, today, or what we know as Persia. And the later generation, they followed this sunnah, and they went through conquered the whole of North Africa, through Spain, through the south of France. And they also moved east through what we call today places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, all the way to China, my dear Muslim, all under the rule of the Sharia at one point. So no doubt, my dear Muslim, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he had this vision, and he instilled that in his own students, in his own companions, of this issue of Izhar al-Deen, that Islam, it must dominate, it must expand, and the Sharia, it must be implemented throughout the whole earth. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasizes this in the Quran 3 times clearly. And generally, my dear Muslim, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala he repeats something 3 times, is to put a greater emphasis on it. And we know the verse, Surah Tawbah, verse 33, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم هو الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهر على الدين كله ولو كره المشركون. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats that same verse in Surah As-Saf, Surah 61, verse 9. And again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala repeats that same verse in Surah Fath, Surah 48, verse 28. But this time with a slight different ending. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, He will send the messenger with the guidance and the religion of truth in order for it to be dominant over all other ways of life, and Allah is sufficient as a witness to this. So no doubt, my dear Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will witness His own deen dominate the whole earth. Even though we may not live to see it, maybe our own children or our own grandchildren may not live to see it, but Islam will dominate the whole earth, from the east to the east and to the west to the west. So no doubt, my dear Muslim, Islam, it was sent for Izharuddin, to dominate, to succeed, to be in authority, to become manifest. This is what we're talking Izhar. And today, my dear Muslims, we live in unusual circumstances where majority of the Muslims, they live outside of Darul Islam. And it was only obviously recently that Darul Islam was established, after almost 90 years without the Sharia being implemented in its totality. And some people, they say even longer than this, because some people, they do not even recognize the Ottoman Khilafah. So as a result, we end up in this situation where many Muslims living in Darul Kufr, because it became Darul Kufr because maybe people stopped implementing the law of Allah, kuffar took authority, etc. So it would turn from Darul Islam to Darul Kufr. Or Muslims may have migrated to countries which were always Darul Kufr, and because they were never conquered by the Muslims, such as like places like the UK, USA, Australia, and other places. For some Muslims, all they ever known is Darul Kufr. And when we say Darul Kufr, my dear Muslims, we say that Darul Kufr is that any land in which the Sharia is not implemented and the Muslims are not in charge. That is Darul Kufr. And many of us, we grew up living amongst the Mushrikeen. We went to their schools, we made friends with the Mushrikeen. Many of our brothers and sisters, they were sucked into the way of life of the Mushrikeen through their own policies of integration. Many Muslims, they became, mixed up with the Mushrikeen because maybe of their own lack of knowledge of the greatness of Islam and how Islam teaches to have al-wala wal-bara, to have how Islam teaches to have bara from the Mushrikeen. And and many people, sadly, they didn't fully comprehend the teachings of Islam. Those of us who went to the madrasas when we were young, I don't recall ever the teacher teaching us about making bara from the Mushrikeen, keeping distance from the kuffar, rejecting them and their belief, subhanallah, not to keep kafir friends, subhanallah. For many of us, when we went to these madrasas, we were taught Islam, you pray and you fast. Yeah, so as I was saying, inshallah, to continue, many of us, we grew up living amongst the Mushrikeen. We went to their schools. Sadly, some of us, we made friends with the Mushrikeen. Many of us, we became sucked into their way of life through their policy of integration. And many times because of our own lack of studies of Islam and being taught Islam comprehensively. And all of this, it resulted in us not only physically mixing with the Mushrikeen, but as well mixing our own beliefs with theirs. And our reality today, my dear Muslims, is that obviously that we are living in a time of fitna. And in this time there are many signs of the hour have already passed. And it's one of the signs, for example, signs of the hour, that people will leave commanding good and forbidding evil. And we are in a position nowadays that it is difficult to tell nowadays, in fact, who is a Muslim and who is a kafir, because of the aqeedah of Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah is so rare, and most people do not even know what is known by necessity. And it's very, the situation is obviously is very sad. I remember, subhanallah, many years ago, we were doing some dawah, and there was one woman, she walked past, so I offered her a leaflet, find out about Islam. And she turned around and she said, I'm Muslim. And subhanallah, it became such a shock. I turned around to the woman, I said, oh, I thought you were maybe Hindu or Sikh. She looked like brown skin, Asian complex. Subhanallah. How very ajib, how, supposed to be a believing woman, yet we can't tell. She looked like, just like one of the Mushrikeen women. Another thing is, I'm sure many of you come across it, when you see a brother, he's completely clean shaven and he has a big bushy moustache like the Mushrikeen. It's a complete opposite to the Sunnah. But obviously this is what we're talking about, just the outer appearance. And if someone, obviously, he dresses, to deliberately look like a Muslim, to give the impression that he is a Muslim, in order to differentiate himself from the Mushrikeen, then obviously this is better and it is rewardable. However, the topic today, my dear Muslim, of making izhar of Deen, really is about making izhar of your own Deen, of your own beliefs. Some people nowadays, obviously, we live in a time where, it's very ajib. And the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that Islam is started as something strange, and it would return as something strange, and paradise is for the strangers. So, my dear Muslim, do not be surprised. We are living in this strange time now, what many of the ulama, they described as a ghurba thaniya. The second strange time. If you think back to those early days when the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the Sahaba, they came out with their message of Islam, it was very ajib at that time. It was something completely new. It was like a big revolution, taking place in Mecca. But once again, we see in the same way today how the earth where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he brought Islam and it expanded, and people were living under Islam, how now the days of Jahiliyyah for many years have returned, where now today many of the parts of the world, it's just like the days before, before the Risala they came, where people are now living under all kinds of oppression, of things like man-made law, people living under tyrant kings and rulers, oppressing the people. And this talk, the notes from this talk, it was, the talk itself was delivered many years ago, my dear Muslims, pre-establishment of the Khilafah. So that's why, before we used to talk about how subhanAllah, the strange time, the second strange time, how, now coming out with Islam, amongst the people, is similar to that first time happened when the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and the Sahaba, they came out with Islam. And they came out, calling people to worship Allah alone. Same today. Now you come out with that same message. You've seen that similar reaction. People see this is some very ajib. You're telling us to reject democracy and only obey the law of Allah. The people do, they react in that same strange way, my dear Muslims. And we are obliged as Muslims to distinguish between the believers and the disbelievers. And many hadith, they command us to do so. I'm sure you've heard many hadith where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, he said, be different from the Mushrikeen. Be different from the Jews and Christians. SubhanAllah, many things. Be different. One of the things, be different from the Mushrikeen. Grow your beard and trim your moustache. SubhanAllah. Be different from Even things like to simple things like, having the suhoor. Have the Prophet instructed us to have suhoor, because the mushrikeen, they don't do that. And many other things, even from the way we dress. Subhanallah. And the Prophet, there's one hadith where the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said that I am free from the people who live between the mushrikeen, without to distinguish between their fires. Now, this hadith, famous hadith, I asked my own Ustad Abu Bara, regarding this hadith, and you can still find his reply on YouTube. What does this hadith mean? Now, just to give you a context of this hadith, there was one occasion of some fighting between the Muslims and the kuffar, and there were some Muslims amongst the kuffar, and they were also killed. Now, the Prophet ﷺ said that only half the blood money should be paid to them, and then he said, because he's free from the one who lives between the mushrikeen without to distinguish their fires. My dear Muslims, it should be the case where we make apparent clearly this fire is not just talking about, some people have said that to the extent that even your own fire should be completely separate from theirs. Yeah, imagine like, for example, like you had a campfire, yeah, and maybe you're living near some mushrikeen. You wouldn't be camping out with the kuffar. You wouldn't be sharing the fire and keeping warm with them. You're all together. No, rather we say this is our fire, and you go have your own campfire. Subhanallah, like this. So the Muslim, he must declare his bara'ah from the kuffar. He must declare his deen, and that he must declare that his deen, it opposes their deen. He does not believe in their deen, and they do not believe in his deen. It should be the case that the Muslim, he makes it clear to the mushrikeen that I'm not of your belief, and I don't believe in what you believe. I'm not going to be in your system, I'm not going to be part of one of your MPs. I'm not going to be one of your soldiers or one of your police officers. Is your deen is a deen of falsehood, and my deen is the deen of truth. And we have this, separation between us and you. Don't get the kafir, the mushrikeen. They cannot think to themselves that we are one, we are united. Rather, it should be the case when the Muslim, he makes izhar al-deen, they should know that these people, they do not believe in what we believe. That is what you call make izhar al-deen, to make it apparent to the kuffar what we are upon, what is our belief system, and what we believe about your system and what you believe, and that we believe it is upon falsehood. So the issue, my dear Muslims, about distinguishing yourself, distinguish your fire from their fire, from the mushrikeen, is really about distinguishing your deen. Yeah, distinguishing your deen. The kafir should know, the mushrikeen, they should clearly know that you reject them and their beliefs. You see, that's why even for those of you who are, subhanAllah, maybe listening from outside the UK, and you see the media, you can clearly see on the media those who are making izhar al-deen in the UK. Those who are opposing the batil, opposing the kufr, opposing the kuffar and their way of life. You see it on the TV. They'll come out, the Taghut, David Cameron, will come out and say, look, these guys, they don't believe in our values. These guys, they don't accept our democracy. These guys, they don't want man-made law. They don't accept our parliament. These guys, they want Sharia law. These guys, they think we're all disbelievers and we're going to go to hell. Subhanallah. How is it they come to this kind of understanding if it weren't for the case of the izhar al-deen? for us to make our deen apparent and what we believe, my dear Muslim. You cannot keep Islam, be shy, and be some kind of like a 007 Islam. Yeah? Undercover Muslim. I'm living amongst the Mushrikeen, but nobody knows I'm a Muslim. They all think I'm one of them. That's not the one who's making izhar of deen. And rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He obliged us to make this izhar of deen if we're living amongst the Mushrikeen, to make it clear that we are Muslims and to make it clear to them what we believe and that we are not from among you. We are not from amongst the Mushrikeen. And that's why, my dear Muslims, the Taghut, he should know that we reject him. No doubt. If you ask David Cameron, for example, the Prime Minister of the UK, ask him what he thinks about Anjem Choudhury, for example. He'll know that this man, yes, he'll say that he rejects me. He rejects my democracy and my parliament, subhanAllah. He rejects the law of the land, if you like. You see, because that's what you call a person who's made izhar al-deen. The Taghut knows clearly that, look, he's not on my side. He's not my companion. Subhanallah. There's a beautiful statement here from a contemporary scholar by the name of Hamad bin Atiq. And he has subhanallah, his understanding of today's reality is very, very accurate. He's one of the ulama from Al-Najd, inshallah. And this statement is in his collection about Tawheed, in a message 23, titled Clarification about the Way for Salvation and How to Free Yourself from the Murtadeen. Yeah, at page 208 to page 300. And he says, and listen very carefully, my dear Muslims, to what he's saying here. And he says, as for the topic of izhar al-deen, many people think wrongly that if they say publicly and loudly to themselves, far away from the people, the kalima, and pray 5 times a day, and pray in jama'ah, in the masjid, but they never show their deen publicly, even though they live amongst the mushrikeen, that they will be saved. This is the most ugly mistakes and error. And he should know that the kufr has many types and divisions, which has been classified. Every entity of kufr has its own sect and certain things that we should know. The Muslim cannot prevail his deen until he differs with every sect and kufr, until he declares his animosity of all the sects and the people with whom he lives. For example, the one whose kufr is a form of shirk, he must prevail in front of them, his deen, by prevailing tawheed. The one whose kufr is a type of kufr less than shirk, i.e. such as denying the messenger, then he must declare in front of them his belief in the messenger and follow him. And the one who gives up the prayer, he must pray in front of him and invite him to pray. The one whose kufr is alliance to the kufr and abiding by the commands, his is izhar al-deen in front of them is to declare animosity for him and the shirk that they believe. In totality, a Muslim cannot have izhar al-deen unless he declares explicitly he has bara'ah from them and the kufr in which they believe. That is why the Mushrikeen said to the Prophet's uncle Abu Talib, "Look what happened. Muhammad defamed our deen. He condemned our dreams. He called us foolish and he insulted our gods." So the Prophet ﷺ made izhar al-deen in Mecca. Subhanallah. And that is the quote from Hammad bin Atiq. So you see, subhanallah, my dear Muslims, you just need to look at the seerah, the life of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, how he conducted himself in Mecca, surrounded by Mushrikeen. What was his treatment with the Mushrikeen? Was it the one of integration? Was it the one of we are all one brotherhood? We are the one of look, we all worship God, it's just a slight different way. We're all on the Abrahamic faith, as they say. Was it the one of the case, we all good friends, we can all have good relationship. Don't worry, you can just worship idols, but I'll just worship Allah alone. Was that the behavior he had? No, my dear Muslim. Rather, he opposed their own kufr, and he made that apparent. He made it clear. And the Sahaba with him as well. They made it clear to them that, look, you are one camp and we are one camp. We are not with you and you are not with us. We don't believe in what you believe and you don't believe in what we believe. And we have this separation between us and you, this bara'ah, this disassociate from us and you. And we reject your way of life, and we believe is batil, is falsehood. And all of this, my dear Muslims, this is from the apparent. This is the Sahaba and the Muslims, they used to come out openly and publicly in Mecca, and they used to declare their deen. Because my dear Muslims, the Islam, it cannot be something that's, you just hide to yourself. Like Hamad bin Atiq, he was saying that, it's not something, the Shahada is not something that you just say to yourself in your own private. And that you just pray, you go to the masjid and you keep yourself to yourself whilst you're living amongst the Mushrikeen. Rather, you must prevail your deen. You must make it apparent that you are a Muslim, and you must make it apparent to the Mushrikeen that you oppose their beliefs and you believe that their deen is batil, is falsehood. This is what we call making izhar al-deen. So the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made it clear that he is not one of them, and he has no agreement with their religion. Yeah, no tolerance for the kufr and the shirk, my dear Muslim. And that's why subhanallah, you have surahs like Surah Al-Kafirun. What is this surah, my dear Muslim? People recite this surah. Today, how many people contemplate, really contemplate on it? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajeem. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun. Say to the disbelievers. Qul ya ayyuhal kafirun. La a'budu ma ta'budun. Wala antum a'biduna ma a'bud. Wala ana a'bidun ma abattum. وَلَا أَنْتُمْ آبِدُونَ مَا أَعْبُدُ لَكُمْ دِينُكُمْ وَلِيَ دِينِ. Say to the disbelievers, I do not believe in what you believe in, and neither do you believe in what I believe in. Yeah, and you will never believe in what I believe in, and I will not believe in what you believe in. To you is your deen, to me is my deen. Subhanallah. What is this, my dear Muslim, if this is not a declaration of disassociation? That look, you and me, we're complete separate. Don't get, as Brother Abu Wala, he says in his talk, don't get it twisted. Yeah, don't get it twisted. We are not of you. We are not your supporters and your helpers. We do not believe in your British values. We do not believe in your democracy and your man-made laws and your parliaments and your king and your queen. We believe in Islam. We believe in worshipping Allah alone. We believe in obeying Allah alone. We believe in obeying only the law of Allah. We believe in the Sharia and the divine laws. We don't accept man-made laws. We don't accept man to legislate. We don't accept parliament system, democratic system. We don't accept your beliefs of freedom, freedom of speech, freedom of, belief, etc. Those are your beliefs, and they are not our beliefs. Our belief is Islam. Our belief is only speaking that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allowed us to speak. Our belief is the one, or to guard our chastity. Our belief is the one that we abstain from all the fahisha. Our belief is the one that we refer to all judgment to the law of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Our belief is the one, that has segregation. Our belief is the one that, yes, we implement the Sharia. Is the one of jizya, one of jihad, one of da'wah. That is our belief. It should be the kafir, the mushrikeen, they should know it clear that these people are not with us. That is what you call making izhar al-deen, my dear Muslim. Just as the way the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in Mecca, he made izhar al-deen. No doubt the kuffar of the mushrikeen of Quraysh, they could not be confused. This guy, he rejects us. These Muslims, they reject our values. They reject our gods. In the same way, my dear Muslims, if we are living amongst the mushrikeen, it needs to be the exact same way as the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That should be clear. We don't believe in your democratic system. We don't believe in your British values. We don't believe in your freedom and your secularism and your capitalism. Those are your beliefs. And we are not with you. We're not going to vote in your election. Yeah? We're not going to go to your Christmas party. We're not going to go and vote in your mayoral election. That is your deen. Rather, we are Muslims and we'll call for our own deen. And we'll tell you that your deen is a deen of falsehood. And we'll invite you to the deen of truth. That's al-Islam. That is how the Muslims, they behaved from all the messengers of Allah when they lived amongst the mushrikeen. They never had this issue of, look, we're all one community, we're all together, etc. Or rather, they call them to worship Allah alone, and they made this disassociation from them. And this is how we should behave whilst living amongst the mushrikeen. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us this beautifully in one verse of the Quran, in Surah Mumtahana, verse number 4. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in this verse that indeed there is for you an excellent example in Ibrahim. Yeah? Ibrahim alayhi salam, the Nabi. And those with him. Yeah? So first of all, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you that look, he's a good example. Ibrahim alayhi salam for you. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala goes and tell you why he's a good example, what he did. And the verse continues and it says, when they said to their people, verily we are free from you and that which you worship besides Allah. We have bara'ah from you and that which you worship besides Allah. And we have rejected you. Kafarana bikum. We have disbelieved in you. And there has started between us and you animosity and hatred forever. Subhanallah. Until you believe in Allah alone. That is how, subhanallah, that is how the Muslim needs to be amongst the mushrikeen. Make it clear to them that we have complete disassociation with you and whatever you worship besides Allah. Not only you, the person, as well as your belief system. And we have disbelieved in it. So that's why the mushrikeen, they should look upon us, the Muslims, as he's a kafir in our belief. David Cameron, you should look, he's a kafir in democracy. He's a disbeliever in democracy. Barack Obama, you should look at it, he's a disbeliever in American values. That is how the mushrikeen, if subhanallah, if the mushrikeen, they're looking at you and says, look, he's my brother, we're all together, he's a good Muslim, we love him. There's something seriously wrong. This person has not made bara from the mushrikeen. This person has not, if he had prevailed his deen, the mushrikeen would never have spoken about him like that. If the mushrikeen are giving you awards and thanking you, for your contribution to society, there's something seriously wrong, my dear Muslim. Because this was not how the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, how he was treated when he made izhar al-deen, when he was living amongst the kuffar, when he prevailed his deen. Another good example is the example of Abyssinia. Yeah. So what happened there was the reason why the Muslims in Mecca, they made hijrah, is because they prevailed their deen in Mecca and were not safe anymore. So the hijrah to Abyssinia was only 6 years into the revelation. And so what happened there, is mentioned here in Ibn Kathir. He said here, when we talk about the role of the Muslims outside of Muslim countries, we should not decide the matter rationally, but by divine rules. Sorry, this is not the statement of Ibn Kathir. When we talk about the role of Muslims outside Muslim countries, we should not decide the matter rationally, but to divine rules which relate to actions and are derived from detailed divine evidences. We must bear in mind that during the migration to Al-Habasha, the Islamic revelation was not complete and the obligation to give da'wah was not legislated. Moreover, from the seerah, we have evidence that the Muslims who migrated to Al-Habasha did not remain silent, but rather they stated clearly that they wanted protection and welfare, and they will not obey the laws. And it's narrated by Abu Musa al-Ash'ari that he said, the Messenger of Allah ordered us to go with Ja'far ibn Abu Talib to Abyssinia. And the news reached Quraysh, who sent Amr ibn al-As and Umar bin al-Walid, and they took gifts to al-Najashi and his nobles. When they reached the king, they offered him the king, which he accepted, and they bowed to the king, and this was the common practice. So obviously, my dear Muslims, the Muslims they migrated to Abyssinia, and the Quraysh, they sent two of their own men at that time. They went Amr bin Al-As, he was a Muslim then, to obviously bring the Muslims back to Mecca, and they took gifts, etc., to earn the favor of the king. And one of the customs was at that time, obviously, for everyone when they come in, they to bow down to the king. Yeah. And Amr bin al-As, he said, O king, some of our people left our land, and they rejected our ways and the ways of our forefathers, and they are in your land. The king said, in my land? And they replied, yes. The king called for us, and Ja'far said, I am your spokesman today. So we presented ourselves before the king, and he was sitting on his throne with Amr bin al-As on his right and Umar on his left, and the priests and the nobles before him. When we reached the king, the priests and the nobles ordered us to bow before him, as this was the law and the custom. Ja'far said, we do not bow except to Allah. And the king asked, why not? Ja'far said, we do not bow except to Allah. And the king, he asked, who is your Lord? And Ja'far, he said, Allah is the one who sent the messenger, and he is the same one who Isa ibn Maryam predicted that his name will be Ahmed, and he ordered to follow none but Allah, and not to associate anything with him, and to establish prayer and pay zakat, and to command good and forbid evil. The king was very impressed, and when Amr saw this, he said, God bless you, but they differ with you about Isa ibn Maryam. the king said to Ja'far, "What does your friend Muhammad say about Isa?" Ja'far, he said, we say what Allah said, and that He is His word and His spirit, which He breathed into the Virgin Mary, whom nobody has touched. And the king, he stood up on his stick and he said, "O my people, the priests and the nobles, they do not differ with us except like this." Yeah, and he used the example of the width of his stick. So this is a narration, my dear Muslims, of an incident that took place when the Muslims, they made the migration to Abyssinia, and obviously the two of the Mushrikeen, they tried to bring the Muslims back. Now some of the lessons we can just quickly learn from this hadith is that the Muslims, they confront the kuffar wherever they are. Yeah? They confront the kuffar wherever they are, my dear Muslim. They are not people who are shy of their deen. They're not people embarrassed to be Muslims. They're not as scared to admit that they are Muslims and they believe in Allah alone. Another lesson we learn from this is that do not compromise, my dear Muslims, even if you are in danger. Yeah, imagine if you yourself was in that situation, you were summoned by the king. Ja'far ibn Abu Talib, he did not hide what the truth about Isa alayhi salam. He did not try to twist and use some clever wording to give it some different kind of impression. No, he told the truth, what they believe about Isa alayhi salam. And also another lesson we learn from this incident is that dawah in the time of the hijrah to Abyssinia was not fard, but today it is fard and it is known by necessity. So you see, my dear Muslim, from this incident, when the Muslims, they went to Abyssinia, they didn't integrate. As the incident mentioned, subhanAllah, one of the customs at that time was to bow to the king. We have now some ignorant people, they come out with statements like, "Oh look, brother, you're in their country, you have to obey the law of the land." Where did they get this from? This is not from a hadith or from an ayah of the Quran. You have to obey the law of the land. When the Muslims, they went to Abyssinia, the law of the land was to bow to the king, and they refused. Why? Because they bow only to Allah. Means you have to obey Allah wherever you are on His earth. There's no concept that, look, we're in the UK, therefore we do whatever David Cameron tells us to do. No, you obey Allah wherever you are on the earth. And I remember, subhanAllah, I was speaking to, one relative, and, they're saying with this similar concept, look, you're in this country, you have to abide by their laws. And so I gave the example, look, if tomorrow the UK government, they bring out a new law, a woman can't wear khimar. Are you going to take off your khimar and walk outside? And they replied, no. So I said, but I thought you just said you have to obey the law of the land. You see, so the reply was, well, you have to obey Allah, and if the law of the land, it says, says something that doesn't contradict what Allah said, then you can obey it. So I said, look, essentially, you're still saying the same thing. You have to obey Allah wherever you are. So subhanAllah, so my dear Muslims, there's none of this concept that, because we're living amongst the Mushrikeen, that we need to do what they tell us to do, and we can disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. No, my dear Muslims, you have to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wherever you are, whether in Darul Islam or Darul Kufr. Another example is this example of Khalid bin Walid when he came to Yamama. He came with 200 fighters, and he ordered them to take whoever they met as hostages. And among them was a man called Muja'ah, and 23 people with him. And he said to him, So Mujahid, he was amongst those 23 people that were captured. Or he was the 24th rather, sorry. And Mujahid, he said to Khalid, "O Khalid, you know that I came to meet the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and gave him bay'ah. And I am the same today as I was upon then. And if a liar rises amongst my people, how can you account me for his sins?" And then he quoted an ayah of the Quran. And Khalid bin Walid, he said, "You have given up what you used to be upon before, and you were satisfied with the liar," obviously Musaylim al-Qazdab, and you were silent about him, and you were the most noble man amongst the people of Yamama, and you knew I was coming, yet you never came nor spoke to me. Your silence is consent to him. Why didn't you speak like others who spoke like Al-Yakhshari, and they attacked him and they labeled him? If you are afraid, why didn't you write a letter to me to help you?" And the Mujahid said, "O Khalid bin Walid, what about if you forgive all of this?" Khalid bin Walid, he said, "Between killing you and freeing you is to keep you in prison. I will forgive you and I will not kill you, but my nafs has a big problem, and you will remain in prison until Allah shows us a way out." My dear Muslims, this incident where Khalid bin Walid, obviously this area in Yamama where this false prophet he rose, and there was one man amongst them, to summarize, called Mujahid. You see, he was the one who embraced Islam at the hands of the Prophet ﷺ and gave him bay'ah in person. Yet when Khalid bin Walid, he entered Yamama and he captured all these people, this man was amongst them. And obviously he was trying to claim that, look, I'm still basically Muslim and I'm still upon the same what I was upon before. Yet Khalid bin Walid, he condemned him and criticized him for not making this izhar ad-Deen, for not, for not even at least informing him, to come and help. Because what the mistake Mujahid he made, he lived amongst this false prophet and he remained silent. And that's why he was condemned, my dear Muslim. And this is why subhanallah, I worry for the Muslim community, especially those in the UK. How many people, they're living amongst this kufr, amongst the Mushrikeen, and they have completely dissolved themselves like salt in water amongst the kufr and the shirk. How many people, they see the kufr and the shirk, Allah's rights being violated every day, every night, and they don't say nothing. How many, every 4 or 5 years they have their elections. People come out en masse to commit shirk with Allah. Yet only a small handful of Muslims, they come out to condemn this, to call people away from this, to make and call for the sovereignty to Allah, call people to worship Allah alone. Only a small handful of people come out, my dear Muslim. Other people, some amongst the community, some people, they don't even see nothing wrong with it, with the democratic election. Some people, they see nothing wrong with going to the Taghut for judgment, to go into the man-made courts of the kuffar. Subhanallah. How many people, my dear Muslims, they live amongst the kuffar, amongst the mushrikeen, they work with them, they live next door to them, they live in their community surrounded by mushrikeen, yet they don't even carry dawah. They don't come out openly and publicly. Many people, they don't feel the need to do dawah. Look, these people are mushrikeen, Allah is going to burn them in hellfire anyway. Rather Allah obliged upon you, obviously, to call them to Tawheed, call them to Islam. And Allah SWT commanded you to declare your Deen to them. Yeah, not to just mix in with them become like one mixed kebab. Yeah, the Sheikh should say. So my dear Muslims, living amongst the Mushrikeen, we have to make apparent our own deen. It is not something just recommended. It is wajib upon you to make apparent your Islam. Make apparent what your belief are. What is your belief system? What you believe, and to make that apparent to the kuffar and the mushrikeen. And another statement from again from Hamad bin Atiq. He said that this shows the situation of the one who lives amongst the mushrikeen without to prevail his deen. You see, my dear Muslim, this incident of Muja'a, see the danger. We don't want to fall into that same mistake of we see the kufr and the shirk around us, and we remain silent, and we don't oppose it, and we don't declare our opposition to the kufr and shirk. We do not show our opposition to the mushrikeen. If we end up like Muja'a, my dear Muslims, we're going to end up facing the same punishment as him. So my dear Muslims, this is why those of us who are living amongst the mushrikeen, it is not allowed for us just to hide our Islam. It's not allowed for us just to keep ourselves to ourselves, just to keep our beliefs to ourselves. Rather, we must come out with our beliefs. We must declare clearly to the mushrikeen what we believe, and we must call them to our belief of Islam. And that's why even if you do not have a covenant of security, you still need to prevail your deen in front of them. And some people said that we should not declare animosity, but just to refute their ideas. Again, Hamad bin Atiq, he said, if a man was living amongst the kuffar, he must prevail his deen until the kuffar make bara'ah from him. Until the kuffar make bara'ah from him, my dear Muslim. This is how, when you make izharul deen, the kuffar, they should make bara'ah from you. Just how, the kuffar, they should look upon you and think, we want nothing to do with this guy. This man, he is not one of us. When you make izharul deen, that's how they should look upon you. If they look upon you and they're thinking, he's one of us. He's good British Muslim. He's the one that he loves, the Union Jack. He will die for Queen and country. He loves our values. This person has not made izharul deen. And the Taghut, my dear Muslims, it should see, my dear Muslims, as people who make bara'ah from them. So no doubt, my dear Muslims, if anyone who's living in Darul Kufr, they should know that these Muslims, they reject our own beliefs, our own values. And you can see from the da'wah of certain brothers in the UK. Well, they'll come out and they openly declare their rejection of democracy, for example. Say democracy is hypocrisy. They'll come out openly and they'll reject British values. They'll reject David Cameron, they'll reject the Queen. And say we will worship Allah alone. Sovereignty is only for Allah. Sharia is the only solution. Can it be confused, my dear Muslim, that these Muslims are not with them? They do not believe in what they believe. And that is exactly how it needs to be, my dear Muslim. Otherwise, you cannot call yourself amongst those people who make izharul deen. And there's a verse here, subhanAllah, Surah An-Nisa, verse 75, I think. You should just give me 1 second. I'm just going to bring this verse up. It starts from Surah An-Nisa, verse number 97. It says, verily, as for those whom the angels they take in death, while they were wronging themselves. Yeah? And the reason why they were wronging themselves, because they lived amongst the Mushrikeen and they were not able to make Izhar al-Deen. While they were wronging themselves. And the angels, they say unto them, in what condition were you? And they replied, we were weak and oppressed on the earth. And the angels, they say, was the earth of Allah not spacious enough for you to migrate therein? Such people will find their abode in the hell. What an evil destination. And then it continues and it says, except for the weak amongst the men, women and children who could not devise a plan, nor were they able to find a way. For them there is hope that Allah will forgive them, and Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. So my dear Muslim, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, those Muslims who were left in Mecca, they were not able to prevail their deen, and they were not able to leave Mecca. The ones who were weak and oppressed. But those ones who were not weak and oppressed, they made the excuse, that we were weak and oppressed. And the angels, they said, was the earth of Allah not wide enough? Meaning they could not openly practice Islam. They could not declare their deen. They were too scared. They could not make Izhar al-Deen. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not give them an excuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to them, replied by the angels, they said, was the earth of Allah not spacious enough for you? Meaning what? If you could not practice your deen where you were, you should have migrated to somewhere else. But they didn't do so. And those people who had the ability and they did not do so and make Izhar al-Deen, they will be sinful, my dear Muslims. Cannot be the case we just live amongst the Mushrikeen and we can just hide our Islam. And Ibn Kathir, he says in regards to Surah Nisa verse 98, except for those who are weak and oppressed and they cannot make a plan to way out, he said they were not capable of running from the Mushrikeen. And if they came out in the night, they could not reach any place. Ikrimah, he said, they could not smuggle their way up to Medina. SubhanAllah. So some people, my dear Muslim, who you can see they're genuinely weak and oppressed, they could not leave the Mushrikeen. They could not leave Mecca to go to Medina, to Darul Islam. To the extent some people, they could not even smuggle themselves out. SubhanAllah. Nowadays some people may be trying to smuggle themselves in other ways in today's era. And we see history repeating itself. On this verse, Surah Nisa, verse 97, as for those who angels, they take in death while they are wronging themselves, the angels will say, in what position were you in? They will say, we were weak and oppressed on the earth. Imam al-Qurtubi, he said, they did injustice by living between the Mushrikeen. This ayah is general. If they were capable of making hijrah and not capable of prevailing their deen. So Imam al-Qurtubi is saying that those people that the verse it condemned is because they were capable of making hijrah and they didn't. And they did not prevail their deen. Abu Dawood narrated in a hadith that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ said, the one who accompanies the mushrik and lives with him is like him. And another example, my dear Muslim, is the incident of Abbas. He was captured at the Battle of Badr, and he said that the Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet ﷺ said, you were fighting with them and you were defeated, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, is not the earth wide enough for you to make hijrah? My dear Muslims, you see the worry, subhanAllah, how many Muslims you see living amongst the Mushrikeen, living in Darul Kufr. And if you do not prevail your Deen, my dear Muslims, then what the Mushrikeen they will do, it's like you will end up possibly coming out with the kuffar. Maybe it may happen to, sadly, many in the community where maybe joined the armies of the kuffar, join the police force of the kuffar, join their spy agency of the kuffar, and become informants for them. Subhanallah. And that is the nature, my dear Muslims. We're living under the authority of the Mushrikeen. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like the verse it says, He made the earth wide, that you do not have to live in this oppression. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the earth wide. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow you to stay amongst the Mushrikeen and hide your Deen and belittle the Deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by allowing to live under the authority of the Mushrikeen. And if you live amongst the Mushrikeen, you have no excuse, my dear Muslim, except to carry da'wah openly. And if you cannot, then you make hijrah. And if you cannot make hijrah, then you keep trying to find a way and asking Allah and others to find a way to make hijrah and continue to seek forgiveness. So my dear Muslims, you see, living amongst the Mushrikeen, you must openly declare your Islam. And if you cannot do so, you cannot just have this mentality that okay, it's okay, I'll just pretend, I'll just keep Islam, the bits that I can practice to myself, like in the masjid and at home. And I'll when I go outside, I'll hide the fact that I'm Muslim. I won't speak out against the Taghut. I won't carry dawah openly and publicly, because that's going to be problematic for me, so that I can just abandon those things. No, my dear Muslims. This is the issue here. If it's the case you're being so oppressed like this, you must leave that piece of land in order for you to make izhar al-deen. Because you cannot live amongst the Mushrikeen and make ikhfa al-deen. Yeah, to like hide your deen and to hide your opposition to the kufr and the shirk. How many people they say, oh brother, if we speak out against the government, this and this will happen. We'll get labeled this and this. Which is true, but you must still do it. You cannot just leave it. You cannot just abandon making bara from the mushrikeen. You cannot just abandon making izhar al-deen. And that's why, my dear Muslim, the hijrah will become fard al-ayn on 4 occasions. One of them is if the Khalifa orders you. Another one is if you are in fitna, i.e. let's say for example you are like a fugitive, your life's in danger. Another one is if the environment that you live in is causing you to commit sins. And the 4th one is if you cannot make izhar al-deen. If you cannot make izhar al-deen where you are, my dear Muslims, you cannot just have the mentality, oh, I just can't make izhar al-deen, but it's alright. It's not okay. You must make izhar al-deen, and if you cannot make izhar al-deen where you are, you must leave to a place where you can make izhar al-deen. And that's why I remember many months ago, I remember Dawla, there was a statement released that anyone leaving the the state and go to other parts of Syria, that they can only leave if they could make Izhar Deen. But in those areas outside the state in Syria, they can't make Izhar Deen, so it's not allowed for them to leave. My dear Muslims, subhanAllah, some people use the evidences and they say that, look, when the Prophet ﷺ, he was in Medina, etc., there's one incident where some of the Sahaba, they went back after they made the hijrah to Medina, they went back to Abyssinia, back to Al-Habasha. But the question is, my dear Muslims, when they back to Al-Habasha, were they facing arrest? When they went back to Al-Habasha, were they facing imprisonment? No, they weren't. When they went back to Al-Habasha, were they able to make Izhar Deen? Yes, they were. There was another incident where one man, he left and his parents, and he made hijrah to Medina, to Darul Islam. And he said to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ that, look, that fact that he embraced Islam and he made hijrah, it made his parents very upset. And the Prophet ﷺ said to this man, go back and make your parents happy the way you made them sad. And this is one of the evidences used to permit to go to Darul Kufr. Now the condition here, my dear Muslims, if it's the case he's going to go back, for example, but he can't make Izhar Deen, is it allowed for him to go back? You see, it would not be allowed for him to go back if he cannot make Izhar Deen. If he's going to go back and then, he cannot practice Islam, he's going to be persecuted, etc. That's why those of us who are living in Darul Kufr, my dear Muslims, we have no choice in the matter. It is either make Izhar Deen or make Hijrah. You cannot just hide your Islam and keep it to yourself. And some people, they say, subhanAllah, look, you come out with your Islam. Yeah, you come out and you make Izhar Deen. And the kuffar, they arrest you and they imprison you. But you made Izhar Deen. You made Izhar Deen. Maybe we come out and we say, democracy go to hell. British laws, British values go to hell. And in fact, we worship Allah alone. We only obey the Sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala alone. And maybe the Taghut, they come and arrest you, put you in their prison, take you to their court, and put you in their prison cells and lock you up. Who really made Izhar? Who really made Izhar of their deen? My dear Muslims, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala never oppressed us. Rather, we oppress ourselves. My dear Muslims, wherever you are on the earth, you must make Izhar Deen. You must prevail your deen. You must oppose the kufr and the shirk. If you're living amongst the Mushrikeen, you must declare your Islam and you must declare your bara'at towards them and to their deen and to their beliefs. And if it's the case you are somewhere in the earth and you're not able to do that, whether it be fear of the oppression from the Taghut, etc., and you're so scared that you cannot make Izhar Deen, then you must go to a place where you can make Izhar Deen. You cannot stay living amongst the Mushrikeen and hide your Islam. Or you're going to be condemned in the same way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala condemned those people in Surah An-Nisa. This is my topic, inshallah, of the ruling of prevailing your deen whilst living amongst the mushrikeen. Jazakallah khair for listening.